Then Suhail gives his portion of the treaty. And he says, if any person from Mecca goes to you in Medina, you have to return him to us. We don't allow any Muslim to leave Mecca anymore. The Muslims said, we can never allow this. How can we possibly allow our brothers who have come to us to return back to you? And before they could write this down, they're still debating it. Before they could write it down, Suhail's own son comes. And Suhail's own son, by the way, he had accepted Islam. Suhail's own son, his name was Abu Jandal. He had accepted Islam. And his own father, Suhail ibn Amr, had chained him in his house and tortured him and whipped him and allowed the other Quraysh, the other mushrikun to whip him and try to finish his Islam off. His own son is being tortured, but at his own hands and in his own house and with his permission. This is the animosity that they have to Islam. So Abu Jandal comes in. Abu Jandal had been chained inside of his room, inside of his house, literally chained. And when he heard that the Muslims are outside, he managed to get the chains off of his feet, but the chains of his hand were still tied. And so he threw himself out of the window into the street, and he literally dragged himself to the camp of the Muslims, because he had been tortured severely. Blood marks were still apparent. You could see the effects of the whips and the chains and all that was on his body. And he threw himself into the Muslim camp, and he goes, "O Muslims, save me and protect me." Look at the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right when they get to this clause, Abu Jandal comes in. And all of this, brothers and sisters, why? All of this is pre-planned. All of this is the qadr of Allah, so that people like us 14 centuries later could wake up and look at the reality. This happened in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. What was his reaction? What do you think our reaction should be if something like this, or worse or better than this, happens? That's the whole point. All of this is willed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Before they can write this, Abu Jandal throws himself in. And they see, chained, tied up, wounds, bleeding, pus. His whole body, they said, was basically tortured. You could see the wounds on his body. He's not even wearing full clothes because he's being tortured. And he goes, "O Muslims, protect me." Suhail turns to the Prophet ﷺ and he goes, "This is going to be the first person that you have to fulfill the treaty with. The first person that you fulfill it is going to be my own son." The Prophet ﷺ said, "We haven't written it down yet." He said, "No, this person." The Prophet said, "Just give me this one person." In the entire seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, I have not come across any incident where the Prophet ﷺ literally begged like he did in that incident. Give me this one person, just this exception, and the rest we will do in the future. We haven't written it down. Literally, he's asking and pleading. I have not found anything similar to this. He wants to save this Muslim, Abu Jandal. But had it been anybody else, Suhail would probably have agreed. Even Suhail's companion even tried to convince Suhail. He had two people with him, tried to convince Suhail, "Let him go, so much he's trying to convince you." But it's his own son. It's his own son, and all of this is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Suhail says, "No, there is no question Abu Jandal has to be returned." And Abu Jandal said, "O Muslims, are you going to return me after what they have done to me?" The Muslims are seeing this. They're seeing his body. This negotiation is happening in front of them. Abu Jandal is waiting to see his own fate decided. What's going to happen? The Prophet of Allah is right there. And the Prophet ﷺ cannot do anything. He cannot do anything. And he tries, he pleads, he requests. Suhail is his father. He's not going to let his own son go. And so he refuses the request. And so the Prophet ﷺ tells Abu Jandal, "Go back. May Allah, perhaps Allah will give you a way out." Umar ibn al-Khattab, he's already now, his anger is building up. Now he bursts. And he says, "Ya Rasulullah, are we going to give this man back, this Muslim of ours back, and we see what the Quraysh have done to him?" The Prophet ﷺ did not even respond. What is he going to say? And Umar ibn al-Khattab took his sword. He only has a traveling sword, and he cannot do anything himself, because if he were to do it, that would wage war. And he marches in front of Abu Jandal, and he's giving his eye movements, Abu Jandal. Look at this, okay? He's giving the eye movements. He's take this sword and do something. Kill these two people. I can't do it. If Umar were to do it, this is open war. Because these are not the emissaries. But if Abu Jandal does it, that's Abu Jandal. He's not part of our camp yet. You know, he's trying to free and escape himself. So he's giving these motions to Abu Jandal, but Abu Jandal's hands are tied. There's not much he can do. The anger that Umar had in our times, these quote-unquote militant Muslims have 100 times more than this. And they blow up. Literally, they blow up in that anger. And yet the Prophet of Allah allowed Abu Jandal to be returned. He allowed Abu Jandal to return. And he said, may Allah Azza wa Jal give you a way out. We can't do anything to help you. In his lifetime, in front of his eyes, a Muslim was given back to the ones who were torturing him. You think Abu Ghraib is bad? You think Guantanamo is bad? What these people suffered was worse. And the Prophet of Allah himself is doing nothing. Why? Why? Because sometimes you have to sacrifice. Sometimes you cannot do anything. And you leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the Prophet of Allah in his lifetime. And Allah Azza wa Jal had willed something other than this. So Abu Jandal had to return. And me personally, what is the most amazing thing to me of this story before we move on, more amazing than all that has preceded, the Iman of Abu Jandal, to have been rejected by the Prophet of Allah and yet still remain a Muslim. To have been rejected. You have thrown yourself in their camp. And he calls out, oh Muslims, I'm here. He's thinking, after all of these weeks and months of torture, he thinks, once I get to the Muslims, once I get to the Prophet, that's it, I'll be safe. For imagine how he broke away from his chains, Allah knows. How he dragged himself all the way to Hudaybiyah from Mecca, Allah knows. Miles and miles he's going, Allah knows how. When he gets there, and he sees this negotiation between his father and the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ supposedly loses. We see it's a win later on, but supposedly he loses. And Abu Jandal has to return. And yet his Iman doesn't go. That is what you call Iman. When the Prophet of Allah cannot accept you in, cannot let you be a part of the Muslims in Medina. And he says, may Allah make a way out for you. And that doesn't lower, it doesn't affect, it doesn't put a dent in your Iman. Subhanallah. That is what you call pure and raw Iman.